Day 49. Nancy Guthrie remains missing, and nothing at the scene has changed. The garage door is still closed, undisturbed. Investigators are now focused on interpreting an unsettling absence of data, a silence traced back to a medical server. While the case is publicly framed as a routine disappearance, the underlying digital evidence points to something far more complex. In the early hours of February 1st, two independent systems failed at the exact same moment. A doorbell camera, responsible for monitoring movement outside the home, went offline. At that same instant, a pacemaker inside an 84-year-old woman stopped transmitting. This precise synchronization has become the core anomaly driving the federal investigation. The central question is difficult to ignore. How could an unknown intruder disable both an external security system and an internal medical device at the same time? Such coordination requires a level of technical expertise rarely associated with typical home intrusions. What investigators are left with is not a trail of evidence, but a complete absence of it. And as time passes, the likelihood of a successful physical recovery continues to decline. This case illustrates the evolving reality of digital forensics. Here, the most important evidence is not what is present, but what is missing. The electronic footprint does not fade gradually, it disappears entirely into the night. Authorities are no longer treating this as a standard missing person case. Instead, they are pursuing the possibility of an operation capable of removing someone from both the physical world and the digital network. The pacemaker silence is particularly significant. It represents the failure of the victim's most critical safeguard, suggesting that every layer of protection was intentionally dismantled. The precision of the disruption points toward a targeted act, not a random opportunity. To understand the scale of what happened, investigators must analyze the available data alongside the physical condition of the victim. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old and has limited mobility. Her daily life depends on careful routine and specific support. She relies on an implanted pacemaker to regulate her heart, a device that continuously sends health data to external monitoring systems. This creates a constant digital link between her body and emergency services. Given her condition, it is highly unlikely she could have left her home on her own during the night. Moving beyond the property would require considerable effort or assistance, possibly involving a vehicle. Additionally, the layout of her Catalina Foothills residence presents physical challenges that further reduce the likelihood of independent movement. Her home environment was designed with protection in mind. The doorbell camera acted as an external layer of surveillance, while the pacemaker served as an internal safety mechanism. Together, these systems were intended to ensure that any emergency, medical or physical, would be immediately detected. Yet both systems failed simultaneously. This indicates deliberate targeting. The individual responsible appears to have understood exactly how these safeguards functioned and chose to neutralize them directly. Instead of confronting physical barriers, they attacked the electronic systems that supported the victim's safety. As a result, the home's security became irrelevant within seconds. No alerts were triggered. No emergency response was activated. The very technology meant to preserve life was effectively turned into a tool for concealment. At the same time, the physical reality of the situation remains difficult to reconcile. Removing an elderly woman with limited mobility cannot be done quickly or without effort. It requires time, planning, and physical capability. The fact that this was accomplished without setting off a single alarm suggests a high level of preparation. The evidence points toward an intruder who possessed detailed knowledge of both the victim's condition and the surrounding technology. This level of precision significantly elevates the seriousness of the threat. Investigators are now forced to reconcile two opposing realities: the extreme physical vulnerability of the victim and the flawless precision of the electronic shutdown. The pacemaker, intended to be her ultimate safeguard, was the first system to fall silent. That detail alone exposes a deep vulnerability, showing that even the most critical medical protections can be neutralized. This case demonstrates a harsh truth. Physical barriers and smart home technology offer no real security against a well-prepared adversary. When those systems are compromised, the home no longer functions as a place of safety, it becomes a controlled environment. The timeline of the last confirmed sighting now serves as the final reliable reference point. At 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, Tommaso Cyan returned Nancy Guthrie to her residence in Catalina Foothills after a routine family dinner. She entered the home without issue, and the garage door closed behind her as expected. This marks the last confirmed moment she was seen by family. From that point forward, everything appeared normal. The house remained secured, and no disturbances were reported during the night. But sometime before dawn on February 1st, a critical shift occurred. The stability of the home systems was disrupted, though the exact timing remains under investigation. By Sunday morning, concern escalated. Nancy failed to attend her scheduled online church service, an unusual break in her routine. This absence prompted her family to request a welfare check. When law enforcement arrived, the initial assessment produced conflicting results. There were no signs of forced entry, no damaged doors or windows. The house remained structurally intact, and the interior showed no evidence of struggle or sudden departure. However, outside the home, investigators discovered a key piece of evidence. A distinct blood pattern was found on the front porch. Laboratory analysis confirmed it belonged to Nancy Guthrie. This immediately created a paradox. Her DNA was located outside, yet the house remained locked and undisturbed. This suggests she either left the house willingly or was drawn outside before the injury occurred. To clarify the timeline, officers attempted to access the exterior surveillance footage. That moment marked a turning point in the investigation. System analysis revealed that the doorbell camera had been deliberately disabled before the blood appeared on the porch. No footage was available, neither on local storage nor in the cloud. The critical time frame had been completely erased. Investigators then turned to the pacemaker, expecting it to provide a precise record of any medical distress. Instead, they found that the data stream had been cut during the exact same window. At that point, the pattern became clear. The digital gap was total. The perpetrator did not simply remove the victim, they eliminated every electronic trace of the event. The blood on the porch remains the only physical evidence within an otherwise empty data field. The simultaneous failure of both systems cannot be explained as coincidence. It indicates a deliberate act by someone capable of disabling both a smart home network and a medical device. As a result, the disappearance itself becomes secondary to the method used to conceal it. The investigation is now stalled at the intersection of physical evidence and missing digital data. Analysts have even identified the exact millisecond when the network collapsed. This was not a routine outage. The system experienced a targeted interference event. Yet before the blackout, fragments of earlier data were preserved. Forensic teams recovered archived footage from previous dates, revealing unusual activity. Recordings from January 11th and January 24th show a human figure at the outer edge of the property. The individual's behavior appears controlled and deliberate, consistent with systematic surveillance. Further analysis of the footage reveals another critical detail. The lighting conditions and shadow angles match the lunar phases on those nights. This suggests the individual used natural moonlight to conduct reconnaissance, minimizing the risk of detection. In effect, the suspect appears to have studied the environment in advance, mapping visibility, identifying blind spots, and preparing for a precise execution under controlled conditions. The recovered surveillance evidence suggests this was not a spontaneous act, but a carefully prepared operation. The intruder appears to have studied the property in advance, identifying camera blind spots weeks before the event. The reconnaissance footage reflects a precise understanding of the environment, an awareness of exactly where visibility ended and darkness provided cover. When the operation was executed, that preparation translated into exact timing. System logs confirm that the doorbell camera shut down at a highly specific moment, the same millisecond the medical server stopped receiving data from the pacemaker. This synchronization represents the most critical in the entire investigative timeline. Both the external surveillance system and the internal medical device ceased transmitting at once. The pacemaker, which was designed to continuously send cardiac data, did not show any gradual signal loss. Instead, the transmission ended instantly, in a single, sharply defined moment. This leaves investigators with two fundamentally different explanations. Either the suspect had the capability to interfere directly with a secure medical implant, or the victim's heart activity itself stopped at that exact time. This raises a critical question. Was a localized electromagnetic interference used to disable both systems, or did Nancy Guthrie suffer a fatal medical event before the removal began? As authorities searched the immediate area, they did not locate the victim near the disabled camera. Instead, they found a single glove approximately 2 meters from the main scene. Laboratory analysis revealed DNA belonging to an unidentified male. This discovery introduces a major spatial inconsistency. The primary scene shows no signs of struggle and reflects a high level of technical precision. Yet this secondary finding suggests a physical mistake, an item left behind. Investigators must now determine whether the glove was accidentally dropped during the operation or deliberately placed to mislead. Either scenario significantly impacts the direction of the case. The presence of this evidence has expanded the search area considerably. Law enforcement teams are now mapping a much larger section of the surrounding desert, searching for additional traces. Every piece of material recovered along this path must undergo detailed forensic analysis. Authorities have confirmed the DNA profile does not match any known individual. They are now working to determine whether it belongs to the figure previously captured in surveillance footage. This single piece of biological evidence complicates an already fragmented timeline. Investigators must now reconcile two conflicting elements: a near-perfect digital operation and an apparent physical error. That contradiction raises questions about the suspect's behavior. Someone capable of tracking lunar cycles and executing a synchronized system shutdown would not typically leave behind critical evidence. This inconsistency creates a significant operational challenge. Search teams must now follow a trail that may have been intentionally manipulated. The location of the glove suggests movement across a wider area, potentially indicating the use of a vehicle. However, no evidence supports that theory. Acoustic sensors and nearby security systems recorded no engine noise during the critical time frame. The complete absence of sound contradicts the idea of a rapid motorized escape. As a result, investigators are now considering the possibility of a non-motorized extraction, an outcome that remains difficult to fully explain based on the current evidence. The terrain of the Catalina foothills makes a fast escape on foot extremely unlikely. Investigators are now caught between two conflicting narratives. The physical evidence suggests a hurried movement across open desert terrain, while the digital evidence points to a controlled, almost invisible operation carried out with precision. To resolve this, authorities are gradually assembling these contradictions into a structured analytical model. However, each new data point only adds complexity. Ultimately, all of this evidence must align with one unavoidable factor: the biological limitations of the victim. From a logistical standpoint, the crime presents a major challenge. Forensic specialists, including experts like Kurt Dabb, have identified a critical flaw in the current theory. Surveillance fragments indicate that only a single intruder was present at the property. Yet removing an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility would require substantial physical effort. A single individual would not be able to transport an incapacitated adult efficiently without some form of motorized assistance. Despite this, no vehicle activity was detected. The surrounding area remained acoustically silent during the critical time frame. This contradiction undermines the single suspect abduction model. Investigators cannot reconcile how one individual could carry out a silent extraction under these conditions. And this already complex scenario is further complicated by a new development. Authorities have intercepted a series of anonymous messages demanding a ransom of $6 million to be paid through cryptocurrency. This sudden introduction of a financial motive disrupts the existing investigative framework. Law enforcement is now working to verify the authenticity of these communications. Cyber units are tracing their origin through routing analysis. In a typical ransom case, perpetrators provide proof of life to validate their demands. In this situation, no such evidence has been presented. This raises serious doubts. The advanced technical capability required to disable a pacemaker and erase digital traces does not align with the inconsistent nature of these ransom demands. If financial gain were the primary objective, completely eliminating the digital footprint would be counterproductive. In fact, such extreme counter-surveillance reduces the chances of a successful negotiation. This inconsistency suggests that the ransom messages may be a deliberate distraction, an attempt to divert attention and resources. As a result, the investigation remains in a state of analytical deadlock. The physical impossibility of the extraction, combined with questionable extortion attempts, creates an increasingly complex forensic puzzle. Investigators are now shifting focus. Instead of looking for a typical intruder, they are analyzing the equipment the suspect brought to the scene. The final moments of recovered footage provide a crucial detail: the individual was not operating empty-handed. The silhouette captured just before the system failure shows a person equipped with a specific set of tactical gear. This detail significantly changes how the operation is being understood. The visual data reveals preparation consistent with a highly coordinated plan. The individual is dressed in dark clothing designed to minimize visibility in low-light conditions. A ski mask completely conceals facial identity, while heavy gloves prevent fingerprints or any form of biological trace. These details indicate a calculated approach, one that prioritizes anonymity, control, and precision from the very beginning of the operation. The recovered footage reveals another critical detail: a visible holster, indicating the suspect was armed during the operation. This alone points to a level of preparation that includes the potential use of force. Every element of the suspect's appearance suggests premeditation. However, the most unusual and unsettling detail is not the weapon, it is the presence of a civilian hiking item, an Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack. This single object introduces a major contradiction. In a rapid extraction scenario, efficiency and speed are essential. Carrying a large, bulky backpack would normally reduce mobility and create unnecessary risk, especially for a lone operator working under pressure. Its presence does not align with a streamlined, high-speed operation. Because of this, investigators are forced to reconsider the entire structure of the event. Why would a single intruder require that level of storage capacity during an abduction? This question has become central to the leading theories. From a technical perspective, the backpack could have been used to carry specialized equipment. Its size would allow for a portable electromagnetic jammer, capable of disrupting both the home security network and the pacemaker's data transmission. Such a device would require significant power, likely supported by a large battery system, which could be concealed within the bag. A tool capable of interfering across both residential and medical frequencies would not be small. The backpack provides the necessary space to house such a system, making this explanation consistent with the synchronized electronic failure observed. At the same time, investigators are also considering a more disturbing possibility. The backpack may have been intended for biological purposes. Its capacity would allow for the transport of materials used to alter or remove evidence from the scene. It could have contained chemical agents designed to break down biological traces, effectively sanitizing the area. At this point, the visual evidence cannot confirm what was inside the bag. It only confirms that it was there, carried deliberately during the operation. This uncertainty leaves a critical gap in understanding the true nature of the intrusion. What is clear, however, is that the suspect anticipated needing additional resources. This level of preparation rules out any theory of a spontaneous or opportunistic crime. Instead, it points to a targeted mission. The individual arrived at the Catalina Foothills residence with a defined objective and the tools required to achieve it. This was not random. It was directed at a specific victim with known vulnerabilities. The contrast is stark. An 84-year-old woman dependent on a pacemaker was confronted by someone equipped with advanced planning and specialized gear. The imbalance in capability is significant, and it shapes how investigators assess the threat. Each item the suspect carried contributes to this profile. The mask and gloves prevent identification and eliminate biological trace. The firearm suggests readiness to escalate to violence. The backpack, however, remains the most important unknown, an element that may ultimately explain how the operation was executed. Together, these details describe a highly disciplined and methodical individual. This was someone capable of moving through a monitored residential area without triggering alarms, disabling multiple systems with precision and silence. As a result, the direction of the investigation has shifted. Authorities are no longer searching for a disorganized offender, but for a calculated operator who understands and controls both digital and physical environments. Now, investigators are waiting for a mistake, any small trace that breaks through the silence. So far, physical searches have produced limited results. The case remains constrained by a lack of actionable evidence, with progress depending on the discovery of a single overlooked detail. The current strategy of law enforcement is centered almost entirely on advanced digital forensics. Federal investigators are gathering massive volumes of raw data from regional telecommunications providers, mapping every cellular signal active in the Catalina foothills during the critical time frame. Their objective is highly specific: to identify a single anomalous device that does not belong to the normal residential network. This process requires comparing thousands of anonymous data packets against known user profiles. Even if the suspect used a signal jammer, analysts believe there may still be a faint electronic trace, a device that briefly connected to a tower before disappearing. Finding that one irregular signal has become a priority. However, this level of digital triangulation is extremely complex. It demands significant time, processing power, and careful filtering to separate normal activity from a potentially hostile signal. While this analysis continues, Nancy Guthrie's family remains in a state of uncertainty, waiting as investigators examine silent data from that morning. At the same time, the physical side of the case is defined by two unresolved questions. The first centers on the blood found on the porch. Forensic analysis confirmed it belongs to Nancy, but the exact sequence of events remains unclear. Investigators cannot determine whether the injury occurred before or after the camera system failed. If the injury happened before the blackout, the absence of recorded footage becomes difficult to explain. If it occurred afterward, it suggests the suspect had complete control over the environment. The amount of blood present also raises questions about the severity of the incident, creating further uncertainty. The second question lies deeper, within the medical data itself. Engineers are working to reconstruct the pacemaker's final transmission by analyzing server architecture for any delayed or fragmented signals. They are trying to determine whether the device recorded a critical cardiac event before the connection was severed. Recovering even a fragment of that data would be decisive. It would provide an exact biological timestamp, clarifying whether a medical emergency occurred or if the signal loss was purely technological. Because of this, significant resources are being directed toward retrieving what may be a very small piece of data. Meanwhile, authorities are also processing a large number of public tips. Every reported sighting or suspicious activity is being verified and compared against the established timeline. Although the volume of information is high, only a small portion is considered reliable. This leaves the investigation in a difficult position. Authorities have accumulated substantial insight into the preparation and execution of the operation, but they still lack any confirmed information about the victim's current location. Search teams continue to work across the desert terrain, yet the most critical progress is expected to come from digital evidence. It is increasingly likely that the case will be solved not through a physical discovery, but through a breakthrough in data, whether that is a decrypted file or a successfully traced signal. Until that moment, the investigation remains stalled behind a barrier of silence. Beyond the case itself, this situation highlights a broader vulnerability in modern security. Many homes rely heavily on wireless systems, assuming that continuous connectivity ensures protection. In reality, these systems depend on communication protocols that can be interrupted without physical damage. A device does not need to be destroyed to be disabled. Its connection simply needs to be disrupted. Wireless networks emit signals that can be detected, mapped, and analyzed. With the right tools, an intruder can identify every connected device and understand the structure of a security system without ever entering the property. This reveals a critical weakness. Systems that rely entirely on wireless communication create a single point of failure. Once that point is compromised, the entire network becomes vulnerable. The integration of medical devices into this ecosystem introduces even greater risk. When a person's survival depends on continuous data transmission, that connection becomes a target. Disrupting it can have immediate biological consequences. As a result, this case underscores the need to reassess personal security. Physical barriers and hardwired systems provide an additional layer of protection that cannot be remotely disabled in the same way. Convenience, while valuable, often comes at the cost of resilience. At the center of the investigation remains one unresolved question: how an external interference event could disrupt an internal medical device with such precision. The answer to that question may ultimately explain the entire disappearance. For now, analysts continue processing cellular data and reviewing recovered footage. The search area may expand as new models emerge, but progress depends on uncovering a single missing link. The digital trail is incomplete, but not entirely gone. Investigators are still searching for that final fragment, the last transmission from the pacemaker. Until that data is recovered, the timeline remains broken. And until a new signal appears, Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remains defined by silence, an absence that continues to persist across every system that once tracked her existence.